The fort loomed on the barren ridge like a scar of old wars, its walls half carved into the black rock of the hills, half built from stone dragged from the valley below. To an outsider, it looked abandoned, crumbling battlements, scorch marks from forgotten skirmishes, and a silence that stretched across the wasteland. But to the 40 soldiers huddled inside, it was the only thing that stood between them and annihilation. The scouts' reports had been clear. 1,000 enemy soldiers were advancing in a solid wave, and they would be upon the fort within the hour. Reinforcements were a full 20 hours away. Holding this ground was suicide. Everyone knew it. Orders from High Command were direct. Fall back to the second defence line, regroup with the larger battalion, and pray the reinforcements arrived in time. The fort was to be abandoned, even though it was a strategic keystone, a position of immense advantage that could dominate the surrounding terrain. Alien Commander Jalak stood on the rampart, his 4 eyes scanning the horizon where a dust cloud rose like a storm. His scaled hands clenched behind his back as he considered the order. He was no coward, but neither was he a fool. To stay was to die for nothing. His soldiers murmured nervously below him, checking their rifles, adjusting their armor plates, looking anywhere but at the horizon. 40 against 1,000. No one needed a tactical board to know the outcome. Then came the voice, deep, human, and unshaken. "We shouldn't leave," said Private Mason, the lone human among them. He stood apart from the others, helmet tucked under one arm and eyes fixed on the rising dust. "This fort is the best ground we'll ever have. We abandon it. We hand them the ridge, and then the valley. We should hold." A hush fell. A dozen alien faces turned toward him, disbelief painted across their strange features. One of the soldiers, a broad-shouldered reptilian named Drell, let out a sharp hiss. "Hold? With what? Prayers? You've seen the numbers, human. We'll be meat before the sun's set." Another snorted. "This is madness. Our orders are clear. Do you think yourself wiser than the generals?" Mason didn't flinch. He set his helmet on the parapet and looked at them all, one by one, as though weighing them on some invisible scale. "I've seen numbers. I've seen odds worse than this. And I've seen what happens when you give ground you don't need to give. Once you start falling back, you don't stop until there's nowhere left to run." The words carried more weight than Jalak expected. The alien commander narrowed his eyes, studying the human. Mason wasn't old, lines hadn't yet marked his face. But there was a steadiness in his voice, a stubborn anchor that silenced even the most vocal skeptics. Jalak descended from the rampart, his cloak brushing against the cracked stone. His boots echoed in the stillness as he approached the human. "You humans," he said at last, his voice low and rough, "you have a habit of trying to prove everyone wrong. But this—" He gestured broadly toward the distant storm of approaching troops. "This is where determination becomes delusion." Mason tilted his head, almost smiling. "Maybe it is, but if delusion can hold this wall a little longer, then it's worth it." The platoon exchanged glances, a ripple of unease passing through them. They wanted to leave. The order gave them permission to live. But to abandon one of their own, even if that one was human, gnawed at them in a way they didn't want to admit. Jalak's gaze hardened. "You're asking me to disobey command." "I'm asking you to follow your instincts," Mason replied. "You know this fort is worth more than its stones. It's the choke point. Every hour we hold here is an hour your second line lives. You said yourself reinforcements are 20 hours away. Sir, please allow me, I can buy you some of that time." "You? Alone?" "Alone," Mason said firmly. "You will fall back. Leave me supplies, ammo, whatever you can spare. That's all I ask." Silence again. The only sound was the wind whistling through the cracked battlements. Then from behind came the laughter. Bitter, mocking, uneasy. "You'll be bones before dawn. If you stay here, then we are talking to a ghost already. Human stubbornness will be the death of him." The jibes came half-heartedly, masking fear. But still, one by one, the platoon began packing. They gathered crates of ammunition, ration packs, grenades, and stacked them near the human. Each soldier did it quickly, without ceremony, as if the act itself was shameful. When the last crate hit the stones, Jalak lingered. His alien eyes met Mason's, hard but not without respect. "I should order you to follow," he said. "I should drag you back by force, but I see it now, you would never obey. You've already chosen your hill to die on." Mason slipped his helmet back on, sealing it with a hiss. "Not die on, Commander. Fight on. There's a difference." Jalak's mouth tightened, but he said nothing more. With a sharp gesture, he led his troops away. The clatter of boots and gear faded down the narrow mountain path until only Mason remained, alone. He exhaled, a long steady breath, and looked back toward the horizon. The dust cloud had grown darker, closer. He could hear it now, the distant thunder of boots and engines, the guttural war cries carried by the wind. The enemy was coming. At the second defence line, 20 miles south, the battalion made camp. Soldiers erected barricades, checked weapons, and settled in for the long wait. They expected at any moment to hear the thunder of artillery from the north, to see the smoke rising from the fort, to receive word that the humans' defiance had been crushed in the first wave. 1 hour passed. Nothing. 2 hours. Still nothing. By the 4th hour, tension began to creep through the ranks. Officers whispered among themselves, glancing northward with disbelief. By the 8th hour, silence fell over the camps. The fort should have been ash by now. Yet no news came, no smoke, no signal. The fortress on the ridge still stood, defiant against the tide. Commander Jalak sat apart, staring into the night sky. His soldiers avoided his gaze, ashamed of their earlier laughter. They had called the human a dead man. Yet somehow, impossibly, the dead man still held the line, and in the darkness a thought began to gnaw at them all. What if he was right? The first shells landed at dusk. The enemy announced themselves with the roar of mortars, their explosions shattering the stone parapets and showering the courtyard with dust and debris. Mason hit the ground behind a barricade of crates, teeth clenched, heart steady. The fort groaned under the impact, but it held. He waited, counting the seconds between blasts, gauging the rhythm of their artillery. They were testing him, softening the defences before sending in the wave. When the guns fell silent, the foot soldiers came. 1,000 boots thundered across the barren ridge, their war banners whipping in the wind, their voices raised in guttural chants. Mason peeked over the wall, saw them advancing in a solid tide of bodies and steel, and felt the familiar calm settle over him, the quiet clarity that always came when death was close. He pulled the trigger. The mounted turret on the northern wall spat fire, mowing down the first rank of attackers. Mason didn't linger. He sprinted across the courtyard, boots slamming on the cracked flagstones, and vaulted over rubble to another emplacement. A rocket launcher coughed flame, streaking into the enemy's flank and scattering them in a cloud of smoke and blood. To the enemy below, it looked like a full garrison was manning the walls. Gunfire erupted from the east, then the west, then the north again, forcing their lines to scatter and regroup. Mason moved constantly, never firing more than a burst before relocating. His silhouette flickered from tower to tower, his weapons thundering from different angles, his traps springing at just the right time. To the attackers, it seemed the fort bristled with defenders. To Mason, it was a deadly game of smoke and mirrors. The higher ground gave him a cruel advantage. From the ridge, he could see every formation, every hesitation, every moment of weakness. He knew where to strike, not to kill the most, but to frighten the most. Fear spread faster than bullets. He triggered mines in the eastern ravine, making it seem as if ambushes were hidden there. He lit a decoy fire remotely on the western tower, drawing volleys of enemy fire away from his actual position. Every trick stretched the illusion further. But illusions could not last forever. From his vantage point, the enemy commander, a broad-shouldered brute with a scar carved down his jaw, watched the chaos unfold. His name was Korak, and though he was no genius, he was no fool either. He narrowed his eyes as his warriors fell back under the unexpected storm of gunfire. Something was wrong. "Report," he barked. His second-in-command, called Rask, panting, replied, "The defenders are stronger than we expected. Multiple heavy weapons, rotating fire from all sides. We may have underestimated their numbers, sir. The scouts were wrong." Korak grunted, watching the pattern. His mind ticked through the rhythm of the shots, the turrets, the rockets, the rifles. He frowned. "Too clean," he muttered, "too even." "My commander?" "The guns," Korak said, pointing. "Do you not see? They never fire together, always one at a time. A wall thunders, then silence, then another side. It is staggered." Officer Rask hesitated, perhaps a tactic to keep us guessing. "Or perhaps," Korak growled, "there is only one enemy." The suspicion grew like a thorn in his mind. To test it, he ordered a probe. 2 squads, one circling east and the other west, their task simple: press both sides at once. If multiple defenders were present, both sides would roar at the same time. The squads advanced under covering fire, creeping toward the walls with shields raised. Mason saw them from his perch and cursed under his breath. He had prepared for this. He darted to the east wall, squeezing off bursts of fire to drive the first squad back. Then he sprinted through the rubble-strewn courtyard to the western side, lungs burning, and triggered the launcher there. The rocket hissed into the night sky, striking the second squad in a blossom of flame, but the timing was off, too much lag between east and west. To trained eyes, the trick was clear. Below, Korak's frown deepened into a grin. "Yes," he muttered. "Yes, I see it now. One defender, running like a rat across his cage." His second-in-command, a younger officer, Rusk, bristling with pride, shook his head. "Impossible. No single fighter could cause such havoc. We've lost dozens already." Korak bared his fangs. "Then tell me, why do the guns never roar together? Why does the fire leap like lightning, here then there? I tell you, it is no army. It is one." The lieutenant swallowed, unconvinced, but he did not argue further. Korak ordered the next strike personally. 4 squads from 4 directions at once. No escape, no illusion of multiplicity. They would scale the walls simultaneously, pin the defender in his tricks, and end the farce. But Mason was ready. He had known from the beginning that they would catch on eventually. He had counted on it. The illusion was never meant to hold forever. It was meant to buy time. And time was exactly what he had used to prepare. Every corner of the fort had been rigged. On the north wall, turrets were wired with ropes and pulleys, triggers tied to weighted levers. Mason could fire them without being there. On the west, grenades dangled on fishing line, their pins connected to tripwires hidden under rubble. Across the fort's approaches, Mason had prepared deceptions. A bucket hung from a cracked beam, a tiny hole drilled into its base. Water dripped steadily into a tin cup tied to a rifle's trigger. Each time the cup grew heavy enough, it tipped and yanked the string taut, firing a shot into the night. Then it would reset as the cup emptied, starting the cycle over again, an eerie repeating gunfire that made the fort seem alive even when Mason was nowhere near it. By the time the 4 squads advanced, the fortress was no longer a simple battleground. It was a labyrinth of human ingenuity, a web of ghostly weapons that moved and spoke with no hand to guide them. Mason crouched in the shadows, listening as the first tripwire snapped, as a grenade tumbled into the path of a squad, as distant turrets roared without him. His lips curled into a grim smile. "Come on, then," he whispered to the night. "Dance with me." And the fortress danced. The night dragged on like a blade. Smoke drifted across the ridge, the air thick with the stench of burned powder and charred flesh. Mason leaned against the wall of the fort, chest heaving, sweat stinging his eyes beneath the cracked visor of his helmet. His traps still snapped and roared in the distance, grenades bursting, rifles cracking on their water-timed triggers, turrets barking from opposite walls. Every burst of fire kept the enemy frozen in place, afraid to move, afraid to test whether the shadows hid 10 soldiers or just 1. The fort itself had become a thing of dread to them, its dark walls spitting death from every angle, as if it were alive and hungry. They whispered among themselves, too terrified to press forward, their advance choked by the phantom garrison Mason had conjured. Below the ridge, Commander Korak bared his fangs. His warriors still muttered that a whole battalion must be entrenched within the fort, but Korak's instincts whispered otherwise. One man. A lunatic defender conjuring ghosts with tricks and scraps. The thought both infuriated and fascinated him. To lose scores of warriors to a single fighter was humiliation. To admit that his horde had been held at bay by a lone human would be worse. He turned to his second-in-command, a lean officer named Rusk, whose crimson armor gleamed in the firelight. "You will go," Korak said. His voice was a low growl, heavy with command. Rusk stiffened. "Alone? A lone hunter will be harder to spot. While my squads keep him distracted, you slip in, climb the wall, and end this charade. Bring me his head. Tonight we end the ghost of the fort." Rusk's jaw tightened. He wanted to protest, but orders were orders. He bowed his head, fury simmering behind his eyes, and slipped into the shadows. The assault began again, half-hearted and noisy. A squad hurled themselves at the north wall, firing wildly at the turrets that spat in reply. Mason rushed to keep pace, sprinting from one corner of the fort to the next, shifting weapons, resetting tripwires, bleeding energy into the illusion of many. His lungs burned, his arms ached, but he pressed on. He didn't notice the shadow climbing silently on the eastern wall. Rask moved like a predator, claws digging into cracks in the stone, muscles taut with coiled strength. Inch by inch he ascended, slipping through smoke and moonlight until he reached the parapet. He swung himself over with a cat's grace, landing softly behind the chaos of crates and rubble. His black eyes scanned the courtyard and froze. There was no garrison, no squads of defenders, no platoons scrambling to hold, only one man. Commander Korek was right. One man running like a mad spectre, dragging ropes, yanking levers, firing a rifle from one wall, then dashing to another to fire again. A single figure against 1,000, cloaked in dust and desperation, and somehow holding. Rask's lips curled in disbelief. Impossible, he hissed. A single human. But disbelief turned quickly to rage. He drew his sidearm ready to strike. Mason felt it before he heard it, a prickling at the back of his neck, a shift in the air behind him. He spun, but a little late. The shot slammed into Mason's stomach, knocking him back against the wall. His breath tore out in a guttural cry as hot blood spilled through his fingers. He staggered, doubled over, the world dimming at the edges. Rask sneered, lowering the weapon, already certain the fight was over. But Mason didn't fall. With a roar ripped from somewhere deeper than pain, he lunged forward. The sudden surge caught Rask off guard, his moment of triumph turning to shock as the wounded human crashed into him. Mason's hands clamped around his wrist, twisting savagely until the pistol clattered to the stones. Now the fight was flesh against flesh. It was no clean duel. It was a savage animal struggle. Mason slammed his forehead into Rask's snout, bone crunching with a sickening crack. Rask reeled, vision flashing white, but countered with a desperate knee to Mason's ribs. The human barely flinched, fists already crashing down like hammers. Each blow struck with the weight of fury, battering Rask's jaw, his throat, his gut. Rask had seen men die from a single shot to the stomach. Yet this one, bleeding, staggering, fought like the wound was nothing but a spark to ignite something monstrous. His claws tore through armor and skin, but the human only roared back, pressing forward, eyes burning with a madness that made Rask's blood run cold. This isn't possible, Rask thought, panic rising as he was driven back step by step, the human looming over him like some unkillable beast. Every instinct screamed that he should already be lying dead in the dirt. Instead, he was losing. Snarling, Rask clawed at the ground, hand closing on a fistful of dust. He hurled it into Mason's eyes. The human staggered, blinded for an instant. Desperation seized Rask's limbs. He lunged for a rifle propped against a crate, nearly fumbling in his haste. He rose, panting, blood streaming from his split lip, and levelled the weapon at the human who was already shaking the dirt from his eyes, already rising again. "You should be dead," Rask spat, his voice breaking between rage and disbelief. But stubbornness does not stop bullets. Mason rolled to one knee, chest heaving, vision swimming, but he refused to look away. His hand twitched toward the fallen sidearm, but he was too slow, too far. Rask's finger tightened on the trigger. The shot rang out, but it was not Mason who fell. Rask jerked, eyes wide, as a smoking hole burned through his chest. He collapsed, lifeless, onto the blood-soaked stones. Behind him, framed in the moonlight of the breach, stood Commander Jalak. His rifle still smoked, his four eyes hard and unblinking. For a moment, silence reigned. Then boots thundered across the parapet. The rest of Jalak's platoon surged into the fort, weapons raised, faces grim. They had returned, not because orders had changed, but because the impossible had held. They had expected the fort to fall within the first hour, yet 10 hours later it still stood, and at its heart one bloodied human still fought. Jalak strode to Mason's side, catching him as his legs buckled. The human's armor was slick with blood, his face pale, but his eyes still burned with stubborn fire. About time. I was running out of blood to spill. Mason rasped with a grin. Jalak's four eyes narrowed, his voice low and unshakable. "And yet you spilled enough to shame an army." Mason tried to reply, but his breath faltered. His grin faded, his strength bled out with the crimson soaking his armor. His body sagged in the commander's arms. For a fleeting moment, his eyes still held that same defiance, the fire that had held 1,000 at bay. Then the light left them. Jalak froze, staring down at the human who had refused surrender until the last heartbeat. Around them, alien rifles cracked as his soldiers kept firing at the enemy, but their commander felt only the silence of loss. The fortress, against every expectation, still stood, but the man who had held it would rise no more. The sun had only just begun to bleed across the horizon when the thunder of engines shattered the battlefield's silence. Reinforcements, columns of armoured carriers and heavy troopers swept in like a tidal wave of salvation. Dust rose in great curtains as the massive formation advanced across the plain, weapons gleaming, banners fluttering in the rising light. By then, the enemy had already broken. The once proud attackers, who had sworn the little fort would fall before midday, had retreated into scattered bands of fugitives. Their dead lay in heaps around the walls, their war machines smouldered like broken beasts, and their morale was utterly crushed. The garrison, the few exhausted defenders who had remained with Commander Jalak, stood stunned. They had survived. More than that, they had held. No, there had been a price, but it was not counted among them. It was borne by the one who had stood alone. The human whose defiance had turned the tide, whose sacrifice had been greater than the lives of 40 soldiers. The superior officer, Captain Veyran, dismounted as his escort secured the grounds. He was a tall figure, his armor burnished to a polish, his voice as sharp as a drawn blade. He wasted no time. "Commander Jalak," he said sternly, his eyes narrowing, "you were given explicit orders to fall back. This fort was deemed untenable. Reinforcements were not to be risked for its defense. Why did you disobey?" The commander, battered but unbowed, turned slowly. His uniform was torn, streaked with grime and powder burns. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, his voice hoarse from hours of shouting commands, but his spine was straight, his presence unshaken. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he gestured behind him. On a stretcher, shrouded in a soldier's cloak, lay the human. His armor was cracked and bloodied, his face pale, but his expression was set in eternal defiance, jaw clenched as though even in death he had refused to yield. Jalak's voice carried, low but unwavering, because he never gave up. Captain Veyran frowned, glancing at the still form. "One soldier? You risked the fort, your men disobeyed orders. For him?" Jalak's jaw tightened. The weight of the night's memory pressed against him, but his words came steady, each one burning with conviction. "You weren't here, Captain. You didn't see it. This fort should have fallen in the first hour. We had no chance. Yet that one soldier fought like an army. He held back the enemy with tricks, traps, sheer audacity. He took bullets, blades, and still kept fighting. He forced the enemy to doubt themselves, to hesitate, to break. He bled so we would not. He showed us what it meant to resist, to refuse surrender even when death is certain." The commander's voice grew sharper, his words ringing like steel on steel. "You told me to fall back. But how could I order retreat when a man with nothing left but his courage was standing alone against 1,000 and refusing to yield?" For a long moment, silence ruled. Only the crackle of dying fires and the distant cries of scavenger birds filled the air. The reinforcements, lined in ranks behind their captain, had fallen utterly still. Every ear was fixed upon Jalak, every heart weighed down by the gravity of his words. Captain Veyran looked again at the stretcher, at the human who had held a fort no army should have held, at the fallen symbol of defiance. Slowly, Veyran's expression shifted. The steel of command softened, just slightly, into something that resembled respect, though he would not say it aloud. Jalak turned back to his weary men, raising his hand in salute. His final words were spoken not just for the captain, not just for the reinforcements, but for every soul present, words that would echo far beyond the battlefield. "Remember this day. Not because we survived, not because we repelled an army without loss. Remember it because one man, just one, taught us all the true meaning of endurance. He stood when no one else could. He fought when surrender was easy. He never gave up. And because of that, neither did we." The words struck like thunder. A hush fell over the field, heavier than any silence of dawn. The reinforcements, hardened veterans all, found themselves straightening their shoulders. The defenders, still weary and dust-stained, stood taller. Even Captain Vyran inclined his head just once in silent acknowledgement. The medics bore away the stretcher, draped in silence, carrying the human who had held the fort alone. Behind them, the stronghold loomed, scarred but unbroken, its stones forever sanctified by the blood spilled upon them. And as the soldiers looked back one last time, they knew they had witnessed more than a battle. They had witnessed a legend born in defiance and sealed in sacrifice. On that day, amid smoke and blood, they learned that a single human could hold the line against the impossible, and in doing so, could teach an army how to stand unbroken.